So, guys, I want to talk about the Ricochet controversy. And what happened was that um, during the AEW Revolution, Ricochet lost the national championship. So he was doing a backstage segment where he was like, throwing things and he's flipping out that Jack Perry won. And a lot of people were saying, like, that's a little bit of overacting because obviously that title doesn't really mean anything. So it's just, doing a little too much. And what happened was that there was a woman online who was also on Twitter just adding to, like, saying that you're a bad actor, Ricochet. And then Ricochet says, well, you have MS. And I think what happened was that he looked on her Twitter and found out that she had multiple sclerosis. And then he said, well, you have MS. And then later on, he apologized for that. But it did kind of create, a bunch of conversations because Ricochet's kind of had a pattern of just being very unprofessional online, responding to people, having soft skin, and just being very like easily instigated. And I totally understand that it's a it's a mix of two things. That sometimes you want to be a professional wrestler, and sometimes you want to engage with fans. So sometimes when you are retaliated, when people say bad things about you, you retort. And I totally understand why people do that because sometimes you gotta say, hey, if I'm a heel, how would a heel wrestler respond? Or heel would respond with retaliation. And also too, it makes the fan feel a little special, like, oh well, I'm being heckled back. Um, it's all about audience engagement. But the other issue is like he made fun of her having multiple sclerosis. And it runs into this issue that we have, like two issues. One is PC culture, where this happened in like the '90s, or the '80s or the '70s. This wouldn't be such a big deal because people were into like hitting below the belt really. Um, the next thing is that ultimately that double standard of ultimately, well, Ricochet's a professional wrestler. It's his job to be heckled. It's his job to be antagonized or have people support him. So obviously, what is what is unacceptable to attack fans with, and that's a very mixed question because sometimes there are wrestlers that go out and they say something and nobody's really going to care, and then there's sometimes there's wrestlers who will go out and say something and everybody cares. I think like a great example is like Christian Cage talks about dead parents, nobody cares. Um, you look at all the you look at all the stuff Vince McMahon has said over the years, like he wants to rape the Undertaker's wife and other things like that. Then Max Caster does a rap talking about Simone Biles and everything like that. There's definitely double standards, and I can totally understand how frustrating that is when people can say certain things and nobody cares, but certain people say things and everybody cares. But that's just the world we live in, where we have to accept that there's double standards. Two people say the word nigger, it's treated differently. That's a classic example. Like I'm mixed race, I'm part African American. I dealt with racism for looking black and being part black. It's people respond to that differently than if it was a white person. It's unfortunate, but that's just the world we live in where there's double standards in what we say. And then he also responds back with another argument about how, people heckle him all day, but he says one thing back and then people are just on top of him, but it's just apples and oranges, like criticizing a professional wrestler for their quality of their craft is one thing, but make fun of somebody's physical ailments is another thing. And then on top of that, you really shouldn't take things as personal, really. I think if they were saying things like, oh, well, I hate Ricochet because he's black, or, oh, well, or they say something about his wife, really, and saying that she needs to pick a better choice of man or whatever, really, like something very personal, we can all kind of understand that. Or Will Ospreay came back from neck surgery, so somebody was like saying, go out and break a leg, not a neck, or something like that. I can understand where the line kind of gets crossed because make fun of somebody's injury, race, sexual harassment, or things like that. That's treated differently than those things are more severe than just criticizing the quality of a professional wrestler's craft, really. So I think that, the overall thing is that whenever we criticize people, you don't know how that's going to come back, really. You don't know how that's going to respond. Um, and then there are people online like Ricochet, pardon me, that are that are probably like always responding to things. So sometimes when people see that stuff, they're kind of like, okay, well, you know what, we want to respond more because you it stands out to us. Like I know, like I've talked about my issue with the 48-hour film project. So whenever I criticize the 48 or I bring up bad experiences, people are going to say, hey, we're going to pay more attention to this because it's a consistent thing, really. So that's just how life goes, really. That sometimes that's just how life goes. That sometimes, what happens to us is that, what we say sometimes stands out more than what other people say. But obviously too that um nobody knows what's offensive to people, or nobody knows what is going to take somebody out, really. Like I call it the South Park rule. Like, South Park is the only thing in this world where they can say whatever they want and no, and they don't get in any trouble, really. But not everybody has that freedom. But with all that said, really, I think the important thing is that when whatever you say can be interpreted to any type of way, really. Whatever you say can get you bad ramification, really. But also the other thing too is that obviously too, we can all agree that making fun of somebody's physical ailments is never okay. It's unacceptable. Even if you see an episode of Family Guy where Peter Griffin tells his son to punch a person with multiple sclerosis in the face, and then Peter Griffin's like, MS, that's monkey scrotum. So Peter wants to punch this guy in the face because what happened was he was bullied by this guy with multiple sclerosis as a kid, and the guy didn't have it, but when he got older, he developed it, really. And so you're doing a joke about Peter Griffin punching a guy in the face who has multiple sclerosis and is walking funny, really. So it's interesting, like how nobody had outrage over that, but Ricochet gets outraged for making fun of a real person, really. What I'm trying to say is that there's evidential double standards. I'm not on the side of Ricochet, but that's the world we live in. What you say and do, or what you make fun of, can get you criticism, and then sometimes when other people do it, it doesn't get them criticism. But the important thing is that what we're all adults, really. We know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and there are consequences for what we say and do. So always watch what you say, really, and understanding like making fun of people's health issues is not cool, really. And like as I said, I'm mixed race. I've definitely dealt with people making fun of the fact that I'm black. I've dealt with people thinking that I'm slow and special needs and treat me like I'm stupid. Um, you know what? I used to have some quirks. Like sometimes when I would walk, I would try to like make sure I would try when I walk, really. Sometimes I would look at floor tiles and be like, okay, I want my right foot and left foot to touch the same tile, really, or whatever. Or when I would be eating food when I was a kid, I would just not like my food touching. My dad was like, oh, that's just the autistic brain, going at work, really. So I know what it's like having mental illness and have people tear me apart for it. I know, like when my grandmother had a forgetfulness, I had family members make fun of her, really. So it's just not cool, really. I think that we can all agree that making fun of people's physical ailments is not okay, really. So Ricochet just needs to watch what he says, but also understands we live in a world of double standards. So sometimes the best thing to say, the best thing to respond back is with nothing, even if it's your job to heckle people because you're a professional wrestler.